Yo, what's up, everyone, and welcome. About 10 days ago, I made my very first trip to San Francisco, and it was unexpected. Let me just tell you that. Absolutely not what I expected. And of course, there was also Figma Config, which is like you can imagine it was the literally the biggest event in the city, right? So it was at Moscone Center, which is also where Apple used to do their events in the past. But in this video, I want to talk to you about my unfiltered thoughts, right? So I don't have a script as such. I don't have a specific agenda that I'm trying to convince you of. There's, of course, good and bad. And there's also like a big, which is neither good nor bad. It's just middle, which I'm still kind of processing. So, guys, first up, let's talk about this. Let's talk about SF. What have you heard about SF, right? I'll tell you what, this is my first time in SF. And so before I visited, the only thing I had heard about it is, of course, it's a tech city. All the startups, all the companies, they're there. But besides that, people are like, bro, there's so much homelessness in SF. There's like fentanyl zombies on the street, like, just like out there. People breaking into stealing stuff. The cops, they can't enforce. If you steal something, you can go as long as it's $950 or below. There's needles, there's tents, this is what I heard. Let me just say. And so I went into it with a slightly negative outlook. And I feel like I was surprised. SF is nothing like that. It's actually nothing like that. It's like saying, hey, there's some shady parts in Bombay, there's some shady parts in Bangalore. Of course, there are shady parts. But here's the thing, here's the solution that we know, you and I. Just don't go there. Don't go to the shady parts. Sometimes you can't avoid it, maybe. And so you're very, very careful. But just don't go there. Another thing I've heard about SF is, there's self-driving cars and all this, but there's like break-ins, right? Don't leave your laptop in your car. Your window will be broken like within 10 minutes. Even if you put something in the dicky, people will break the window, take it out. Heard about that. And bro, we parked our car. Janil and I, we rented a car. And again, maybe it's certain areas, but for most of SF, I did not see a single, literally, I walked, we drove, saw a bunch of different areas, did not see a single broken into car, did not see, like there's one or two homeless people here and there. When you're commuting, yes, you do see homeless tents, but don't you see the same in Bombay? Don't you see the slums under the flyovers and stuff? But anyway, the reason I'm telling you all this is just don't believe what you see, especially this kind of thing, right? SF is maybe one of the best cities in the world, is what I realized. And I'll explain why in a bit. But don't let the negative perception get to you, right? It's very easy to dismiss and be like, "Arey." But this brings me to my second point. The people of SF. What kind of mindset do they have? What exactly is it about California, right? SF is just that part. But of course, just to give you a heads up, traveled. So SF was where the city area was where Config was held. Janil and I, we stayed in Oakland, right? So we had a hotel, Guju owned Radisson chain, right? Hotel, Radisson franchise. We rented a car. We also went to Mountain View, Cupertino, right? Where the Apple, Google offices and all are. So got to see a lot of, let's just say California, not a huge, didn't go to LA and stuff, but got to see that. Here's what I observed about people. This thing I just said, which is why do you hear so much stuff about homelessness, drug problem, all this stuff in SF? The reason why is people who've grown up in SF, people who've been there for a couple years, they have the craziest idealism that I've ever seen. Like, and when I say idealism, right, they're idealists. They live, maybe a little bit exaggerating, they literally live on paradise on earth. SF has sunny days throughout the year, right? Number one. Number two, access to nature. Not even going outside the city. In the city, you've got so much nature, right? So why do I say that? When we work in these kind of jobs that are high stress, you need a way to escape. And when I say escape, I don't mean daru sutta. You need escape in the sense that you need a release, right? All this tension build up, you need a way to release it in a healthy way that doesn't build additional dependencies and stuff, right? And so access to nature, that's really fucking good. Like, I know how people deal with stress now in SF. They just walk. They just take a walk in the forest. They just go fucking sit under a tree. They sit under the park. The reason it's such a high productivity place, I realized, is because you've got release. You can push yourself way harder because you know that it won't break you, that you will have ways of releasing. So that's the second thing I realized. That's why they work so hard, or that's how they work so hard. Like, to me, most of my adult life, I've very much been inspired by Mark Zuckerberg. You guys know it, this whole social network thing. And of course, Steve Jobs, Apple, right? The first Apple device I had was a iMac, one of those blue iMacs. And then my second Apple device was a iPod Classic. And so, kind of, even though I didn't know about design, I feel like I've used good design, right? Like I've been a user of good design. I've been, or let's just say, not even a user, I've been a beneficiary, benefited from these amazing products. Like I really was like, oh, it's so rare to be able to have an Apple product. Like who buys Apple product, right? 2007 this is. And then on the back of that iPhone, right? What would you read? You would read designed in California by Apple. And the first time I even heard the word California was probably on the back of an iPod.
Hi. If you're somebody who really wants to get into UI UX design, maybe you're super interested in learning how to design amazing looking websites, maybe you want to build apps that get used by millions of people. Well, I was in a very similar position, and the biggest challenge that I faced was how do I keep myself accountable? How do I stay up to date with the changes that are happening in our industry? And how do I make connections with people who have been there, done that, and potentially have a lot to teach me? Well, that's where the 10K Designers cohort comes in. And we do this about 2 times a year. And this is a 4-month live program where you will actually have the opportunity to work on some real projects, interact with some of our mentors. And this is going to be the design school experience that you've been waiting for. A way for you to figure out how can I channel my creativity into a career in tech that pays well and lets you set up a creative lifestyle. So if that's something you're interested in, check out our website. Hopefully enrollments are open when you check this out, but if not, we would love to have you in an upcoming cohort. Okay, gotta go. Talk to you later.
Coming back to present day, being an SF, I understand what Steve Jobs was going through, bro. I really do. In the sense that if you've grown up in SF, maybe I'm saying this too casually, but your life in some ways is like yes, the problems that humans go through, right? Health, wealth, relationships, those still exist everywhere in the world. But if you have a car, number one, you need a car if you want to make the full use of being in the US. If you have a car, SF is the best place to be. And the optimism that I can only imagine, right? The optimism that it would instill in somebody who's grown up in that environment. Crazy, crazy optimism. Because it's not like you've not known struggle. You've known struggle, right? There's of course struggle. Seeing this city, living in this city where other people have also done this, right? So SF, for example, that area, of course, they've had Stanford, they've got a lot of these DARPA research projects, right? So DARPA was like military's arm, research arm that was looking into things like the internet or the ARPANET back then. Those folks, all based in the valley. A lot of military research, then semiconductor research, and then telecom research, and not just research, development as well, happened in Silicon Valley. And so being there, I mean, the first tweet I made after I reached SF was finally reached this thing. What a beautiful city, Cupertino. I regret not coming here sooner. It's good. It's fucking amazing. And this brings me to my next point, which is being there in California. Another thing I realized, funny thing, Ghana was like, when you were at the Apple Park in Cupertino, did your iPhone know it was home? Did your iPhone know it was that's where it was designed? Funny, but when you're there, you realize, bro, all the shit that we use, these guys made it. The internet was made in California, right? You're on the internet, you're using a Californian product right now. YouTube. Whoa. YouTube made in California. I don't think I need to go any further, but Facebook, Twitter, whatever you name it, roots in California, right? So crazy. I really want you to understand this AI thing once and for all. this helped me understand it, so I think it'll help you too. There are outlier talents, right, in every field, not just UI, product design, UX, even in fashion. Not everybody can charge 800 euros for a hoodie, but the top 1% can, and they got there through very different ways. So, in reality, the ceiling is usually way higher than you think, which is you might have something here, but all it takes is one person to figure out here, and now suddenly the ceiling goes even higher. To most of us, when we are starting out, we are here on the floor. How do we start out? We look at this, we look at sites like Hooli, and we're like, wow, bro, other than the money alone, I want to make stuff like this. I want to make this kind of cool stuff. And if I get paid money, that's even more of a bonus. But till then, I want to do it just because it's so cool. It's way cooler than anything else I've seen. Right? You might feel that. Or if you're a fashion design student, you might be like, you know, I've had such a horrible time selling cheap clothes. Everything is so fast fashion. Screw fast fashion. My taste is high fashion, and I'm not going to compromise. Even if I can't afford it, I will make sure that I don't let my standards drop. Point being, all of us, when we get started, we don't look here, we look up. We are looking up at the stars. The stars here are top 1%. And guys, let me just be straight up. I am not top 1%, right? I am maybe, let's say, I will say top 5%, top 10%. But I clearly know, love straight up, I'm not going to live in delusion. There are people way better than me, and I look up to them. So do you, right? And this is just a level. So when you're on the floor, you can't see the ceiling. Now, before AI, imagine this ceiling, imagine this floor. There is also a middle point. What do you call this middle point, guys? I call this average. Here's the thing. Today, when we use the word average, it kind of is like an insult or something like, bro, average kaise bula diya mujhe? No, no, no. Average is a very specific thing it means. Average means the middle point between the floor and the ceiling. Okay? What that means is anybody who's below the floor. So let's say you are a student who has just started learning Figma. You're not above the floor yet. You are exactly on the floor or maybe a little bit below it. But you start doing a little bit of it and now suddenly you're on the floor. You spend a month designing, okay, you're suddenly over here. Or, if you're really cracked, you're like, bro, designers are designing. You're telling me designers work 10 hours a day? Fuck, I want to work 10 hours a day because I love this so much. You might within 3 months, 4 months, immediately hit average. You might be like, wow, I feel like I'm at the average point. I still look up though, but I'm still at the average point. Now, here's what happens after AI. So, if this is the scenario before AI, after AI, this top designers, right? And here's the thing, this is subjective. Top is subjective. Even the best designers, like you might look at, let's say, billionaire founders, right? Or $1 billion valuation founders in India. Of course, they look up to $1 billion founders in SF. Now, $1 billion founders in SF, they look up to the trillionaires. They look at Bezos. Bezos looks up to other people, right? So it's always a progressive thing. There's no end to this. Now, after AI, what happens is this person, imagine is the Hooli, the person we just saw. They are like, whoa, I have Mid-Journey. That means I can now do illustrations. I can do illustrations and I couldn't do illustrations before. Suddenly, their own personal ceiling goes up by 10 points. Okay. The other day, next day, they come across a tool and they're like, oh, wow, like I can generate 3D models. In the past, I had to hire designers and I could not afford to hire another designer, but now I can do 3D myself. And so the level of things I'm going to do now onwards will be even crazier. The ceiling rises for them by another couple points, right? So you will notice the very experienced designers out there, they are loving AI. And this is the reason, because they have seen just in the last 2 years, their ceiling rise more than it has in the years before that. And so they are like super excited about this. But what happens when the ceiling rises? What's happening to the floor? Now, on the floor, let's say somebody who was, we're talking AI and before and after. Imagine before Figma. Before Figma, if you had to learn how to design interfaces, you needed to learn Photoshop. So before Figma, the floor was much higher because Photoshop is much harder to learn than Figma, right? But now Figma, some of the updates they have, you can use kits easier. So now when you open a brand new Figma file, let's say you're a newbie to Figma, right? You're opening a Figma file for the first time. You can now just go in here and be like, hey, yo, simple design system. And then you expand this And oh my God, imagine you're a new designer and you heard about Figma 10 minutes ago and you found this and you're like, yo, landing page, let's fucking go right here. And like, okay, what else? What else? I want to do a shop page, okay? And I want to create a shop for like Indian Balenciaga or something, right? Like a random idea. Guys, this what you're seeing here, it took me 6 months to reach this stage and I didn't have Figma when I started. So in Photoshop, it took me 6 months to get this good. It took you maybe 6 seconds, less than 6 minutes to do this. Here's the thing though, in those 6 months, me trying to figure this out, I learned a lot because I had to do this from scratch. You doing this, you learned nothing. You learned that there's now a kids panel in the side, but you didn't learn why this layout is the way it is. You didn't learn why this spacing is 24. You didn't learn why, hey, what exactly is this element called? Oh, it's a footer, right? So people who had to learn through very difficulty, they typically learn better because, hey, like we learn when things are challenging. If things are easy, then we get bored with them. Okay. You guys making sense, right? Because I'm going to come back here. The floor is now much lower, guys. The floor is way lower than it was. What does that mean? Which means somebody who was here, who would have to spend 6 months to even reach this minimum. Me in 2011, me in 2012. 6 months it would take me to go from here to here. Well, now the floor has come to meet you. You don't have to go there. The floor has come to you. What happens when the floor gets lowered like this? Now, suddenly, this is what happens, guys. I'll show you visually, okay? This is what happens when the floor gets lowered. Engineering students all over the world, all over India, see this and they're like, bhai, ye karte hain, bhai. Like, oh my God. So, who wants to do leet code? Who wants to do DSA and algo? Let's do this. But guys, what's happening here? You see this? It might seem like the average is still staying the same. But here's the thing. Remember what I said earlier? The ceiling is way higher than you can imagine. Well, what another way you can imagine is a team of 10 designers, right? Imagine some startup in Bangalore, Series C, they have 10 designers. Suddenly they're like, okay, not 10, let's say 30. Let's make it a little big. 30 designers. Suddenly they're like, why? You know what? Like, per designer productivity has gone up because now they can also do these extra things and they're excited to do these extra things. They will have layoffs and they will realize that, hey, firstly, designers that don't have taste, designers that don't have craft, designers that don't have perspective, designers who are middle management, who are just like project managing, suddenly they're like, hey, we don't need these people anymore because, hey, why do we need them? This thing is better. So the ceiling goes crazy. And so this is a conversation I've had. And from when I spoke to design leaders at Config, this is what they told me. They said we are actually reducing our team sizes for these reasons. Number one, we are cutting out middle management. So if you are not into the craft of things, if you're just a manager, we are cutting you out, right? So middle management layers getting cut out. So compressing. And when that happens, there's a lot of these middle managers who are now looking for jobs as well. And they are also applying now to slightly below their, slightly junior, maybe than their expectations, right? So it gets more difficult now to get a job. But this average is now here, guys. It might not look like a lot, but this is a significant jump. Like this average is now almost at the previous ceiling. The previous ceiling. And when I say previous ceiling, let's say 2015 ki jo ceiling thi, what most people thought was the ceiling. I'm sure 2015 mein also there were cracked people over here. The average today is the ceiling of last time, of couple years ago. And the ceiling of today, what we think is killer design today, 10 years later, it's going to be average. But then, guys, is that surprising to you? I'm going to show you a screenshot. This is what Google, Yahoo, MSN, Apple, eBay, the search engines of the time, this is what they look like in 1999. Do you think a newbie made this? Do you think an average designer made this? You guys realize this was made by back then Silicon Valley designers. This was a revolution, right? When 1999, by the way. So websites had just started becoming visual, right? I think prior to 95, websites were text. And so now they were starting to become visual. Guys, this was the peak of web design in 99. Today, what is this? The peak, right? This was the ceiling back then. Today, this is the floor, guys. Imagine that. This ceiling, what was once the ceiling, is now the floor. But guys, it's also because it's been 25 years since this happened. Obviously, obviously, to hona hi tha. So coming back here, you guys see what's happening? Because I'm gonna give this a label, okay? This thing we were talking about. This is a phenomenon that's not new. It's kind of been happening all along throughout technology. It's the death of average. Today, we, you, me, we cannot afford to be average. And what that means is nobody wants to be average, of course. Nobody starts out saying, one day I hope I'm average. But when you start out, yeah, average is also difficult to hit. Death of average means even if you're good today, you will one day become average. And that one day might come sooner than you expect. Designers today with 15 years of experience, they're getting fired. Why? It's because they were middle managers. Why were they middle managers? They were probably good at it, but they chose not to improve their taste. So they're now stuck in the past. They're like, अरे हमें वैसे बनाना चाहिए, हमें वैसे बनाना चाहिए. भाई, we've moved on. वैसे नहीं बनते अब websites. They don't have, they've not upgraded their taste. They've not upgraded their craft, right? Maybe they spent 10 years designing in Photoshop and so they never bothered switching. There are designers today who are still work in Illustrator. Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, they make websites. It's a small subset, but it exists. They've not up leveled their craft. And number three, perspective. I know this is scary, but wouldn't you rather face the scary truth than avoid it and it sneaks up on you later? So let me also put down these three things: taste, craft, perspective. A designer employed in the industry today, right? Whether it's a freelance, whether they do freelance, they have their agency, full time, intern be, right? Designer employed in the industry today spends 7 hours a day designing. That's 40 hours a week. That's 160 hours a month. And guys, I am also not sure if this is the real number. I know a lot of startups, they work way more than this, right? So let's just make this look a little neat. Realistically, though, spends 12 hours a day working. And again, out of these 12 hours, I would say at least 50% is Figma, at least 50%, 6 hours a day. That's 12 into 5, so 60 hours per week, 240 hours per month. तो पहला क्वेश्चन है, ब्रो, दम है तुम में? क्या तुम्हें दम है इतना इतना डिजाइन करने का? Because most people, when you start out, we are amateurs, right? A Figma user, it's an amateur. You can maybe in your whole, if you're starting out, maybe in your whole life you spend only 40 hours in Figma. A designer does that on a normal week. And so, how do you go for Figma? You have to spend in hours. You have to spend hours designing, right? So the reason I show you this is, let's do a calculation now. Let's assume you are a student working somewhere else, don't have the time yet to design a lot, but are interested, right? I'm assuming a lot of us, a lot of you guys who are early are kind of here. Step one, I would say for you guys would be turn interest into obsession. Now I know बोलने की बात है, मतलब क्या होता है exactly? You have to figure that out. But turn interest into obsession, because somebody who's obsessed will always beat somebody who is interested, you know? And guys, the bar for being interested is so low these days. Like floor, right? People type interested on a LinkedIn post जहाँ पे एक notion template मिल रही है. मतलब ये कोई बात हुई? That's what interest is. That's how low commitment it is to be interested in something. So number one, I say turn it into obsession, right? I understand you can't be 100% obsessed. You're still early, and it takes a lot of energy, by the way, to do this. But it's possible, right? So don't forget that you have to do this. Like push towards it little by little. Step two, reclaim your hours so you can channel them into designing. What do I mean by reclaim? Which is hours, so we have the same, right? Whether it's this or whether it's not. Hours are the same, but they're spent doing something else. Something else might mean you have to report to somebody, maybe you have to attend college and all this. It could also mean, fuck, bhai, I wasn't serious enough. Like, I really have to stop smoking up or something like something. And you have to sacrifice something to get them back. So, step two is reclaim your hours so that you can channel it. And then step three is try to, and I say try to work the same amount of hours as an average designer employed in the industry today. And guys, I said average because if you're just starting out, even average is quite high, right? So even somebody who is average is spending this much time designing. In fact, somebody who's average probably is spending this much time because they have to work even harder because the expectation on them must be quite high. Finally, step four, figure out how you can get paid for some or most of these hours, right? Maybe self explanatory. But once you reach step three and you're like, hey, I mean, I still have a full time job, but in a week, I'm doing a solid 10 to 20 hours of designing. And by the way, starting out, you're not going to have meetings. So 70% of your time will be in Figma, 30% will be in a notebook or something like that, thinking about planning in your head, you know, just putting things out. Once you're at step three, the immediate next step for you, once you reach a respectable amount of hours where you're like, okay, I think I'm ready to fly a plane now, even if it's a small one, you got to figure out how you can get paid for some or most of these hours. Typo. Okay. So that might mean your चाचू your mama says भाई website बना दे मेरे लिए ये आ रहा है वो so you're like okay and you're like okay a website will probably take me 5 hours 10 hours to make anyway I was spending that time doing stuff on my own designing okay wow I'm going to get paid for that right ask your chachu mama to pay you though and you're like wow I'm getting paid for that or if you are actually putting in even these 10-20 hours you might be like hey like I should start publishing this because initially I was not happy with my work maybe I was like this is not good this is not good this is not good but eventually you will make one thing which you're like oh this is good oh wow like I'm this is maybe the best thing I've made and you will want to probably naturally you will want to post it and when you post it people will see it you post it enough times more people see it and that's how you get inbound leads and at this point you're not a professional freelancer but somebody who's out there looking for help they're going to reach out to you because they're like dikhta hai ye this person is visible they do the work and so I think I'm because they're like kind of confident they're doing their thing I think I'm gonna give them a shot I think I'm gonna let them do this one small thing for me even if they fail अरे क्या ही हो गया मतलब मुझे तो कॉन्फिडेंस है कर लेगा और कर लेगी okay guys makes sense so that's where you want to be real quick I'll link something here as well I think these videos talk about exactly this I know the title is a little bit clickbait type thing but this is exactly the process or concept that I'm describing in these videos step 5 maybe is the game play the game this online game of finding alpha finding things online okay this video I think internships today are harder to get than they were a little bit in the past and again why the floor has gone up right so that is the thing and how to do that try not to compromise on your health sleep all that of course but try not to compromise and like don't spend time doing things you don't want to do and this time that you do spend doing the things you do want to do don't do average do best do great right good gets you hired sometimes but great gets you hired all the time right so even if you do good you need great if you're good I'm glad you reached there but let's go to great yeah cool guys chalo it's been a nice one I'll see you all on a live session on a YouTube video or just somewhere else on the internet thanks guys see you and bye bye